Hello, OT friends, and welcome to the Uncommon OT series. My name is Patricia Modis. I'm the Transitions OT, and I'm your host. So today, I'm very excited to introduce you to our guest of honor, Lauren Sheehan. Lauren Sheehan is the current Director of Product with Neurolutions, Inc., and has been in industry roles for the past 4 years. Lauren has held clinical roles in outpatient neuro-rehabilitation for over a decade, as well as administrative roles in clinic management. She is the chair-elect for the Technology Networking Group of the American Congress of Rehab Medicine and founding co-chair of the Clinical Managers Task Force, supporting clinicians in industry roles in rehabilitation medicine. Lauren is the former Productive Aging Special Interest Section Technology Coordinator for the American Occupational Therapy Association, and she has recently served as an Adjunct Faculty Member at Samuel Merritt University in Oakland, California, as well as other OT programs throughout her career. Lauren is the co-founder of the Rehab Tech Summit, an online conference and community that aims to bring together industry professionals and rehabilitation clinicians, researchers, and entrepreneurs to share information and ideas in the rehabilitation technology space. She has a consultancy, Beyond the Clinic, which aims to support clinicians in their transition to non-clinical roles, specifically in the technology field, as well as companies as they explore the fit of their products in the rehabilitation market. So in her free time, she enjoys spending time with her son and partner, eating her way through travels around the world, and singing karaoke and enjoying time with family. So without further ado, I'd like to present to you Lauren Sheehan. Welcome, Lauren.
Hi, Patricia. So nice to be with you.
Thank you for spending the time to talk to us about your uncommon OT work.
Absolutely. I think it's really exciting what you're doing, shedding light on all of us that are in various sectors of OT and using our skills in various ways. And it's a passion of mine to talk about how OT, what's happening in technology and how my OT skills relate, because I think there is room for many more of us in these uncommon spaces.
Oh, great. That's exactly what we want to talk about. And I'm excited to delve into all of that. But before we do, I'd love for you to share a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your background with our listeners.
Sure. As you mentioned in the bio, I have been practicing for, it's been 15 years now. Primarily, my clinical background is in neuro-rehab and the outpatient space and other settings as well. And in terms of sort of how I made my way into this uncommon space of OT and technology, I was working with a patient, a client who was very motivated by technology. He himself was a game programmer by background, and trying to connect him, as we do, with something meaningful and trying to get him specifically to increase his upper extremity motor function. We found a product that ended up being the company that I first worked for in tech. So it was the NeoFect Smart Glove at the time. And I really enjoyed giving kind of feedback to the company about the product, and ended up making my way into a role, the first clinical role with that company, and have been in technology ever since. So definitely a passion of mine to increase the awareness of technologies that can serve our clients. And I love to support OTs that are interested in making their way into the technology field, as you mentioned.
Yes, and there are quite a few, and I love that you're making that bridge possible. And it's precisely why we have the show, right? So that we can share a little bit of that and talk a little bit about those paths, right? So can you describe to us a little bit about your uncommon OT work at the moment, the population that you're serving or whom you're serving, what needs you're addressing and any particular specific settings that you're working in. I know you're working in technology, so it may not necessarily be like in a typical hospital or clinical setting that we're talking about, right?
Right. Yeah. So as director of product and really product manager, my role, my day to day, and I wear my clinical hat, so I would consider myself, clinical product manager or director. But my role is to kind of translate the needs of the client and the work that I do is primarily with individuals, or the end user is an individual who has had a stroke, since that's my clinical background as well. Translating their needs to the technology team as we create products. And a couple things that I'm working on currently are supporting the Neurolutions team with the IPSY hand device, which is a brain-computer interface device that uses EEG, so uses the brain signal of the unimpaired side of the brain. So we use the ipsilateral signal to drive neuroplasticity through when the patient or someone who's experienced a stroke thinks about moving their hand. That signal is translated to a robotic hand device that allows them to basically move their hand through thought.
Fantastic.
Reinforcing that signal on the unimpaired side to strengthen that signal and allow the patient to sort of use a different part of their brain to modify or utilize their impaired limb. So I work with our team on the software interface, making sure that it's accessible for patients and clinicians, considering how the product would be used in the clinic, in terms of making sure that it's easy to use, that we kind of cut down any barriers to adoption in the clinic. We know that if devices take any length of time to set up, because of how busy our clinic settings are, it's less likely that the device will be adopted. So that's a big part of what I do. And then assisting with research. We don't have any current research going on at the moment, but I've assisted with our trials of the IPSY hand in the California Bay Area, and then translating that research to things like our FDA submission. So, providing the evidence as to why the device has efficacy and how it fits into the client needs for increased rehabilitation intensity and, having access to a device like this at home.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm working on a separate project, which is a digital tool for stroke sort of care transitions and care management in the 90 days following discharge from the hospital.
Oh, great.
And that's sort of with a sister company, but yeah, all really focused on improving the quality of life for stroke survivors. And making it easier for them to access, the technology that they need to continue their rehabilitation journey.
That's fantastic. It's such great work you're doing. And it sounds to me like you're really working with the manufacturers, the clients, the providers, right? The clinics themselves to see if they're adopting or if their products are being utilized and how so, right? So that sounds fascinating. I want to talk a little bit more about your typical day in a little bit. I want to kind of take a step back and ask you a little bit more about what inspired you to do this type of work. So I know that, neuro rehab, OT is your jam. That's really where most of your OT background and your skill set is in, and now merging it into with technology. Is this something that you always knew you were going to do? What inspired you to sort of move into that trajectory?
Yeah, I really sort of stumbled into it. I was mentioning the gentleman, the patient that I was working with that was a game developer. We discovered this piece of technology together, which was sort of my introduction to the company that I started working for. And I think throughout my career, I love being in the clinic and I love working with neuro patients. I saw at one point, especially spending time in, management and administrative roles, that there's some red tape in the world that we live in as OTs. And doing the best work and kind of living at the top of our license, so to speak, really making sure that the skills that I have are able to be utilized. I felt like there was a lot more opportunity in technology development to reach a number of patients. It kind of takes my caseload, so to speak, my influence from individual patients to populations of patients and their families. So that's what really drew me into a love of technology and wanting to be on the device development side and research. I think the other piece is that just for my personality and the way that I like to work, the clinic change in the clinic setting is slow. Yeah. It takes time to move through all of the kind of hurdles that can get in the way of best practice in the clinic, whether that's productivity or just the special circumstances that we find ourselves in the hospital setting or in the clinic setting. So I wanted to move more quickly in my work and be able to sort of iterate and provide input and see something change more rapidly. And so the startup world, which is both of the companies that I've worked for, would be considered startups. They're small. We've got a small number of team members. People wear lots of hats. We do a lot of different things. We sort of learn quickly. We get something out there. We get feedback. We make a change and we sort of do it all over again. And I found that actually the technology development and design process was really very similar to the OT process.
Can't wait to hear all about that, because that's always the driving point in all of our episodes, right? We're all doing different things, but the process is the same. So tell us about that process and how it intertwines with OT and technology.
Yeah, so the design process is really about coming up with a hypothesis or a design, for example. And we do that all the time when we're working with our patients. We use the assessments that we have available to us. We use the interview that we, are kind of motivational interviewing with patients to really tap into what's most important to them. And then we create an intervention, which in my world is we create a piece of technology. So the sort of assessment process to me is like the design process. What's the problem? What are we trying to solve for? What is going to be most meaningful to the end user? Then the intervention is this idea of, kind of putting something out there, right? So we, in the technology world, designing a device or doing maybe making a prototype of something like the IPSY hand or this other digital tool, doing a pilot of a piece of technology or a technology intervention. And then very similar to the OT process and the OT world, we iterate on that. We see how it lands with the end user. We see how maybe our intervention idea or activity idea works for the client. And we grade that. Is it in the sweet spot? Are we kind of hitting that just right challenge in OT speak? And we do the same thing in technology. Does the device work the way that it was intended? Does it fit the workflow? Are the features a good match for the client needs, the client being the patient or the clinician in some cases? And then we iterate, just as we do as OTs. If something didn't land, like if that activity, for example, maybe wasn't the right fit, or we found ourselves having to grade it a bunch, then we consider that as we kind of bring that back around into the design process. And so similar in the tech world, we see how a prototype works. We get user feedback, we do user research, and we iterate and try again with a variation of the product or the tool, whatever it is that we're creating. So I love that. And for me, it just made sense. Like, I love that my OT brain sort of already worked that way. And so it was a really nice fit, just at a different scale, to be putting that same kind of design process to use when it comes to how we develop, test, and, change or iterate on technology.
Yes. So I love the parallels with all of that, and you're really being very specific about what it might look like in technology and what it might look like in typical occupational therapy settings. So thank you so much for sharing some of that. So I know you talked a little bit about your path, but is there anything else that you can share about what led you to this type of work, or how you got there?
I think, just in terms of what about me allowed me to take the opportunity when it came up. Specifically, it was that I was in this place where there was an option to work with a new piece of technology and give feedback, but it wasn't, quite that easy. I felt that it was important for the company, any company that's creating rehab technology, to have a clinician on board. And I was really surprised, although it's continued to be a theme, that many companies that are out there creating technology don't necessarily have the clinical input that they need early on in their process. And I felt really strongly that in order to best serve the patients that they were trying to serve with this technology, that they needed a clinical brain and sort of clinical input behind that.
Mm-hmm.
To make sure that the device really was a good fit, that they were thinking about how, sort of where these people who've experienced strokes, how they interact with the world, what they need, how to message to them, how to message to clinicians, what research is necessary in order to really support the need for these technologies. So I guess if there's more of an answer that I can give you, I was open to and really excited to speak to what I could offer to this team of technology developers, because I feel strongly that the OT, skill set and how we see our patients and what we can bring to the table in terms of bigger picture thinking outside of individual clients was really a great fit for what they needed. And I made a case for that, and they took me up on it. So
Yay. I absolutely agree that it's in everyone's best interest for you to be part of the picture, right? That you basically talking to everyone involved and making sure that everything is working out smoothly on all levels. How were you able to find a technology or a tech company to work for? I think that might be a question that a lot of our listeners might have. So here you are, an OT working in neuro rehab. Were you seeking out technology companies? How did this particular situation land on your lap? How did you make this happen?
Yeah, as I mentioned, it really was through the patient and I finding this piece of technology that was a fit for the patient. It had sort of the gamified approach to rehab that he, as a game designer, really loves technology and was interested in using this piece of equipment for his rehabilitation. I think one of the best ways, and I get that question often as well, one of the best ways, if you're interested in the medical device side, is to try out and seek out technology in your practice. Companies are going to be much more interested in what you have to say and sort of your interest in maybe joining their team if you have experience with their product. If I'm coming in as an outside OT and I've never used a device that a company, sells or supports or is developing, I'm just not going to bring as much value. So trying out and exploring different technologies in clinical practice, I think, is one of the best ways to, first of all, see what's out there, get an idea of different types of technologies that you might use in your clinical practice. And that's going to differ depending on the type of practice setting that you're in. There's so much happening in the world of technology, even outside of rehab. And I think there is an opportunity for us to move out of specific rehab technologies and into other digital health areas, all within sort of what we can provide in terms of the types of patients that we know how to serve, right? So I'll give you an example. I'm working with someone who's interested in the mental health space. Well, there's tons of apps these days and different digital health products that are focused on mental health.
Mm-hmm.
An OT with that interest or that background could bring a lot to the team in terms of really understanding the population, being able to create and develop certain interventions or ideas within the product that meet the needs of the patient. So I think for me, it was, being open to moving into or sort of helping co-create a role for myself in technology. But I think it really starts with being aware of what's out there and just being interested, being tech interested and trying different things and sort of seeking out understanding what's happening in the larger technology development field.
Got it. That's such great advice. And thanks for the example. When you said the apps, I just started thinking, wow, you're absolutely right. Our knowledge can certainly be useful in that realm just because there's so much, there's user interface, there's being able to even see, right? Just being able to see the apps and the clarity. I'm finding that a lot when I'm doing a lot of my social media things is that why is everyone using such tiny little fonts? I think
accessibility is huge.
Yes. And then it makes me think bigger. And then now I'm thinking, okay, we really need to sort of include subtitles and such also in all of our correspondence, right? So that's, I'm informing myself a little bit more about that and hoping to include some of that in all of my platforms too. But thank you so much for sharing those tips. Super helpful. Would you mind sharing with us a little bit more about your startup?
Yeah, the company that I work for is called Neurolutions, and it's often a long haul for devices to make their way into the world. I don't think clinicians that aren't involved in sort of the technology development and research don't necessarily know how long it takes for a device to make its way from research and development into, actual commercialization and land in the clinic.
How long does it take typically? I know, average.
I think it may be a little bit of an outdated statistic, but I have heard like between 10 and 17 years.
Whoa.
I
wow. And so much technology changes over that time too.
It does. And so much of it, unfortunately, dies before it ever gets to the end user. And that's largely because it takes a lot of money to create these devices, to do the research that's necessary, to go through all of the processes that are necessary and testing to get the device actually ready to be used by patients and clinicians. So we've been working through the FDA process over the last year especially, and have received FDA clearance for a de novo device, which just means basically a new category as a brain-computer interface tool. We're the first FDA cleared brain-computer interface device for rehabilitation, which is very exciting.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks. So lots of effort went into that, from the, technical writing to the all of the work to put together the submission and look at the research, and just lots and lots of work. So now,
are those some of the hats that you're wearing?
Absolutely.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, I have a partner in crime who is another OT actually, who works primarily on the clinical strategy and also wears lots of hats, but has carried our clinical studies and our research in large part. So she has a big job as well. But we are cleared as a rehab device, and making our way into sort of early conversations with clinics that are interested in the product, and planning that out and starting to take next steps toward making the device available for clinicians and patients. So it's exciting, but it can also be a long haul. It's a very complex process. And again, I think, we just, as clinicians, one day we see a new piece of technology, and I think most of us don't know the heavy lift that it takes, and lots of, years and lots of input over time to get devices actually ready for the market.
Yes, wow, this is fascinating. And we'll definitely include all of this information in your show notes. I'm sure our listeners would want to get a visual of your product, and just kind of, to put it into context, right? So do you think this would be a good time for us to get into a little bit about your typical day? What a typical, I don't even know if you have a typical session or a typical meeting.
Typical day. Well, in a startup, we use a little bit of a different structure oftentimes, and we're not doing this right at the moment, but there will be a stand-up meeting in technology companies, which is basically kind of a huddle at the first part of the day to get everybody on the same page. Like, what's everybody working on? What are your blockers? How can we support each other? What do you need from the rest of the team? Which I think is a really interesting way to practice in any setting.
Kind of like rounds.
It is a little bit like rounds. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, so the stand-up meeting, pretty typical in technology companies. And then right now, I am working on a couple of different things. I work a lot on our sort of reimbursement strategy. So looking at different pathways toward reimbursement, and also with the sister company that I mentioned that is focused on the digital health product for individuals post-stroke. We're doing a lot of user research. So that's an app-based tool. And I am meeting with so there's a director of product for that company, and myself as kind of clinical product manager, wearing that hat right now. So looking at user input, taking them through the app and kind of getting their pain points. So things that they're stumbling over, things that that don't make sense, features that they'd like to see, things that they're excited about related to the technology. So it's really a lot of those user research and feedback sessions to get us ready for a pilot, which is coming up in the early part of next year. So yeah, lots going on, and I'm wearing more hats than usual, kind of working with two different companies right now. So every day is so different. And I think that question you probably get answered this, in a similar way with Uncommon OTs. It's not a clinic kind of every day has the same rhythm. It's all over the place, depending on sort of what the priorities are. But a lot of discovery with end users, whether that's research or otherwise, a lot of, product development conversations. What do we consider changing? A lot of strategy discussion. How do we get this device into the market and get it paid for? And I would say those are probably the big thematic areas of my work.
Do you typically meet with these individuals in person, or are they mostly virtual right now?
We've been able to move all of our sort of feedback sessions to online, to virtual, and we've used a variety of different means. I mean, obviously, when we're doing research with the IPSY hand, for example, we are meeting with patients in person, but as a company, we're looking at ways to assess and treat patients with our technologies in a virtual world. I think we collectively in the world, and OT is, on that same trajectory, like we've had to work differently, and we've had to think differently about our practice. And, working for a technology company, we have leveraged technology to try and continue getting the information that we need and interfacing with users and getting feedback in creative ways, which is, mostly remote and virtual at this point in time.
Yes. Can you share with us a little bit about some recent highs or some recent successes and some recent challenges and lows that you may have had within your role?
Yeah. Well, I just am about a month back from maternity leave. So I would say, working for a startup can be challenging in terms of the amount of time that is required because there are typically, fewer hands on deck. So I think my challenge has been primarily personal, which is just continuing to map out and create boundaries for myself between home and work. I think that becomes a little more difficult when you're working remotely. And for a startup, there's never the work is sort of never done. So there's always something that I could be doing. So yeah, that's been just a personal challenge, and has to do with the type of work in working for a tech startup. On the other side of that, wins, really exciting to be a part of getting this device through the FDA process. Really proud of that accomplishment. It was a ton of work and so much of a team effort to make that happen. So really excited about, getting through that milestone and being able to look at how we get the device into the hands of people that, that really need it for their rehabilitation. And I think the other win highlight, not necessarily in my job roles, but as you mentioned in the bio, I myself, along with another OT, Rahima Hemraj, and I had this crazy idea last year about this time, probably a little earlier in the summer last year, that we wanted to create an event where therapists who are interested in technology and companies that really have a need to get in front of therapists for input on their products and feedback and to try and test their products in the field, and that we wanted to get them sort of at the same table. And so we created the Rehab Tech Summit, and it was such a fun project. And it's really become a community where, we have partner companies that are excited to work with us to do it again in 2022. And so we have our dates set. We're actually going to be hosting a specific neuro edition of the Rehab Tech Summit, as well as kind of the main event. But I'm really excited about continuing to create space for clinicians that are interested in technology to come alongside the companies that are creating these devices and make sure that, as we were talking about, that the value that OTs specifically and also other rehab professionals can bring is considered in how these technologies are developed, so that we don't end up with something coming out into the world that really isn't a good fit for clinical practice, my kind of workflow as a clinician, or doesn't meet the patient need. So just really trying to bridge those two worlds of industry and clinical practice together.
Thank you so much for that. And how important, especially after you shared that it takes about 10 to 17 years on average to get something out there on the market. I mean, you kind of want to make sure it's on target, right? And it's effective. So
yes,
I think you're a blessing to these tech companies.
Thank you. There's space for more of us. So I'm on a mission to get more therapists to be able to, have that seat at the table and speak to the value that they can bring in these settings. Because again, I was surprised to see it the first time when I came on board with this company as the first OT in, a market they were already selling into without anyone clinical on their team. And it happens so often, Patricia.
Unbelievable.
All the time. I'm actually working with a couple of companies as a consultant to give insight and to provide them with support and sort of guidance as to, the rehab market. Rahima and I run some clinical advisory groups for companies to give, basically to get new technologies in the hands of clinicians and then to get their feedback, so that we really are giving input to the developers of these different tools.
Yes. Much needed input.
Yeah.
So congratulations, first on the FDA approval. Again, that sounds super complex. And when you say it's a lot of work, I bet it's a lot of work. So congrats on that. That's important to acknowledge. And also the Rehab Tech Summit. How incredible to put that together for rehab professionals to get together and to really put everybody in the same room, put everyone in the same space. And you just really made it easy for everyone else. So I think that also requires some acknowledgement, because this is exactly what we're trying to do here, right? So I'm right on board with your mission. I love that you're just exposing these options for other OTs. And not only that it's an option, but we're really good. We're a really good fit for these roles, right? So I want to talk a little bit more about that and kind of like those OT skills. I know that I personally am not very tech savvy. I'll tell a little joke. I think you invited me to one of these tech meetings, and I think I shared this with you. I couldn't even get into the event. So I said to myself, oh my gosh, this is not the subspecialty for me. And so I can't even get in. But, that's precisely what I want to know is, are there any specific OT skills, important skills that you want to highlight that you think would be really great for someone who was interested in bridging into this type of work?
Sure. I definitely think any technology requires some amount of research, right? Whether it's like truly clinical research or user research. So I think our research skills, our ability to formulate a question and sort of devise a plan to get that question answered is really, really useful in order to kind of, step further into the world of technology. User research, or listeners may have heard of UX research, user interface research. I think we are well positioned as OTs to know how to connect with users. Oftentimes, they're, patients or clients, and be able to get some of those questions answered after we understand what it is that we're trying to learn. So I think research is a huge one. I think I'm not on the sales team. I've never been on the sales team specifically, but I think being able to make an argument or sort of, sell at least the idea or the value of a piece of technology is really useful. And we do this, I think, already in how we sell OT.
Yes.
The ways that we, speak to the importance of what it is that we're trying to do and why it's useful. So I think there's a parallel there. What else? I think, like I mentioned, this kind of idea of the design process, we already think that way as OTs, but I think OTs that are interested in this field can learn more about the design process and how, we might use some of those skills to give input on and help develop products. And then I think just generally, being open and being personable. I think that fits for any role, but there are so many different, and I think this is an interesting parallel to OT too. There are so many different personalities and types of people that I work with on the product side, right? There are, the software engineers, there are the hardware engineers, there are
all the tech people,
and they speak a little bit of a different language.
Yes.
And, being open to, and I think open to feedback, and then also open to trying to understand how best to get, my point across, or how best to connect with those different types of people. And I think we do that well as OTs. We have a good sense of who's in front of us and sort of modify our approach based on what we understand of them and how they see meaning. And I think that's super valuable in the world.
So I heard a bunch of different OT specific skills there. You talked about communication, right? That's huge. Just being able to understand various communication styles, how to communicate to someone, how they need you to communicate to them, right? Just like our clients talked about rapport building, right? The entire building is almost your caseload, because you work with a variety of individuals, and you have to really tap into your OT skills to see what's the best way that you can kind of get through this person, right? Or educate them or inform them or whatever, fill in the blank.
Yeah.
You also talked about assessment skills, really questioning, asking the right questions, right? Making sure that you're asking the right questions so that you get the right answers, or so you get the answers that you're looking for. So lots of OT there. Marketing. That's a huge one that we're all trying to really get more accustomed to, right? You're right, though, about that's something that we generally do innately in our work, advocate for OT. It wasn't until recently that I really made that connection 100%, that each time I, really suggest something for a client, coming from an OT voice and from an OT lens, that I am advocating for OT in my profession. So in your case, that's, again, everybody in the building and all of the clients who are using those products, right? Yeah. So incredible. So many skills that are really coming into play, and how we're able to kind of generalize it, right? So thank you for sharing some of that too. How do you stay on top of your skills in technology right now, so that you're feeling just, you're on top of everything that you're having to do? I mean, everything is changing so quickly, and I would imagine that maybe there's even more pressure on your end because you're working in this industry.
Yeah. Some of the sort of continuing education I do, I really try and stay up to speed on what's happening in neuro rehab from an educational standpoint, because of the products that, we're creating. We want to know what best practices. I want to know what research says about things like motor relearning. And so I do try and stay on top of that type of education. What's a little bit different in terms of, sort of supporting my roles is some of the tech education. So I've really tried to stay up to speed. I'm a member of a couple of online education groups like International Design Foundation, which has a lot of like user research education and those types of education that's outside of OT specifically. Mm-hmm. That helps to support my skills. I'm also working on a nano degree, which is fancy word for sort of an online certificate in product management with one of the tech kind of education companies, Udacity. So yeah, there's a lot of different options for supportive skills and sort of learning and growing in the tech sector. But I try and keep a foot in both, mm-hmm. growing my tech related skills and keeping up on my OT skills. And I don't do a perfect job. So I learn a lot from clinicians I interface with. I learn a lot from product folks that I interface with, and just open to always learning and sort of doing things differently. When, we discover that there needs to be a change in the way that's approaching something. Again, I think adaptability, very much an OT.
Yes, another skill set that's super important. Can we switch gears a little bit and talk about money? Another big question that our listeners have. You mentioned earlier about sort of looking into reimbursements or ways to reimburse and coming up with strategies for that. Can you expand on that a little bit and maybe share how your services or your current services are funded or how you're paid?
Yeah. I would say, sort of generally speaking, most rehab technologies are device specifically are initially cash pay, which probably a lot of clinicians know. It's difficult to make a case for coverage of technologies by insurance payers. It requires, if you think about the amount of time that I talked about, all of the research and product development that typically takes to get a product into the market, a lot of that is research. And there's kind of a point of entry of research to get a device to market, but a lot of additional research and high quality, intense, large studies like, RCTs and multi-site randomized clinical trials to really be able to be positioned for any sort of reimbursement. And so it's often the case from a technology, medical device perspective that we start out as cash-based while we're sort of going through that process of building evidence and making a case for why this piece of technology is better than standard of care.
Okay, got it. Are there ever grants for things like this?
Yeah, on the patient or kind of user side, definitely there are. I would say there are not as many as I would like to see. And that's been a struggle for me sometimes from an ethical standpoint. Like these devices, because initially they're largely cash pay, they're available to the people who have the capacity and the ability to pay. And that has been a challenge for my OT sense of self and sort of my OT ethos, because I think these technologies, and products that can improve motor function and improve quality of life really need to be more accessible.
Agreed.
So that's a personal struggle and a mission. We just, there's more work to do from an advocacy standpoint to make sure that payers see the utility and that we're really able to speak to the efficacy of these tools. And so we're still working on it, but unfortunately their ability, an individual's ability to pay is how they initially access, a tool that might be new to the market.
Yes. Well, I appreciate that you're really working this product from all angles, from the development of it all the way to making sure that it's accessible to all individuals. So I really appreciate that. And, I'm sure you'll come up with some fabulous ideas, and I'd love to kind of have you back one day to talk a little bit more about that once this product is out there.
Sure.
Can you share with our listeners any myths or misconceptions that you'd like to call out about working as an OT in technology?
I don't know if there are many myths that I am aware of, misconceptions. I don't know. Is there anything that you would offer, Patricia? Or
do you have to be really tech savvy? Yes, that's why. I want to know if I can do it.
That's the real question. No,
how tech savvy do you really have to be?
It's funny. I think it's a good mix to actually have folks on the team that are not super, like super users in the technology sphere. I think Rahima, who I mentioned earlier, always jokes that she's like the least tech savvy to be a tech OT. And I think there's a place for it, right? So we're the voice of the customer as the sort of clinical person within technology. So our customers are not all tech savvy. Not all clinicians are tech savvy. So we have to be able to translate use of the technology to someone that maybe is not as, doesn't have the same technology propensity as some of us. So I think there's room for you, Patricia. There's room.
Oh, that's so comforting.
For
Thank
all
you.
Comers. Yeah. I've learned a lot of what I've learned about tech, on the job. I wouldn't consider myself the most techie person either, actually. And so a lot of it has been, being introduced to new things and trying them out as they've been created. And I think it's helpful to not always be able to troubleshoot everything because it has to be easy for the people that we're creating it.
Yes. And I guess more importantly, it has to be in your interest, right? If it is in your interest, so you have to be interested in this field or this subspecialty. So, Lauren, thank you so much for spending the time with us, for sharing all of this incredible information. I have a feeling a lot of our listeners are going to want to be in touch. I think they're going to want to be involved with your Tech Rehab Summit. Can you share with us how we can find you, how we can follow you, and be in touch with you should we have any questions?
For sure. There is a Facebook group that's Therapist to Tech support group. So for folks that are in the process of transitioning or interested in a transition to tech, that's a great place to connect. I also started and then passed along to some very lovely PT friends, the Clinician Transition group on LinkedIn. So another place to connect to all kinds of non-clinical roles, but with a tech emphasis. And then Rehab Tech Summit is on LinkedIn as well. You can also find us at rehabtechsummit.com. And my consultancy, I'm holding workshops pretty regularly, about monthly, for clinicians who are interested in transitioning to non-clinical roles, specifically in technology. And my website is beyondtheclinicco.com.
Thank you so very much. We're going to include all of that information in our show notes so everyone can have access. And again, this has been so enlightening. It's been such a special hour spending this time with you. Thank you, Lauren. And I can't wait to have you back to talk about this product, the Ipsy hand, right?
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you so much, Patricia. And excited to be in touch with anyone who wants a seat at this tech table as an OT. I think there's room for all of us.
See, hear that, everyone? Get in touch.
Thanks, Patricia.
And that wraps up another inspiring episode of the Uncommon OT series. Connect with me at www.transitionsot.com. And don't forget to sign up to be part of the Transitions OT community. By doing so, you'll receive my latest compiled list of uncommon OT practice settings, the latest news on mentoring offerings, uncommon OT live events, non-traditional OT resources, and more. You may also follow me on my social media pages on Instagram and LinkedIn. And if you love this episode, head on over to Spotify, Stitcher, Apple, and Google Podcasts to follow, rate, and leave a review. I also ask you to consider pledging your support to my Passion Podcast project by being a patron on Patreon. It is very much appreciated. Sending big OT love. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.